All yours.
Okay. I will present myself. I am Dr. Héctor Ramos. I am in Chile right now, doing a PhD on medical sciences, and my team is in Honduras. All of them are medical students, and they also have a lot of passion for research and medicine. They are Sofía Peña,
Hello.
Xochitl Navarro.
Hello.
Nelson Espinosa.
Hello.
He is Camilo.
Hi.
Eric.
Hello.
And Camila.
Hi.
Hello.
And well, it's an honor for me to introduce you, Dr. Patrick. Dr. Patrick, he studied medicine at King's College London, and St. George's Hospital in London. He has also focused on his academic research on protein, energy, malnutrition, and he has done a lot of work in Africa, in the UK, in Jamaica, and he has a lot of papers on malnutrition. And he has also worked at the University of Ottawa, and it's an honor to meet you, Dr. John. And yeah, and we're honored to hear you and talk a little bit about this medicine and ethics, and hear you on your lecture.
Okay, what do you want me to do?
Okay, what do you think about how is ethics and medicine, and maybe some things that we have forgotten on the Hippocratic line of thought.
Okay, well, ethics courses were not invented till long after I'd become a doctor. We never had any ethics courses in the 1950s. Now we do. But of course, when we introduced our ethics course in Ottawa, I was not invited to take part for reasons which will probably become clear in a minute or two. But the dean at a cocktail party shortly after he'd announced that he was going to do this, and I couldn't resist teasing him a little. And I said, well, it's nice that you're going to have an ethics course for the students, but of course it will not make them ethical. Yeah. And he was appalled. He said, of course it will. That's the object of the exercise. I said, yes, but it still won't make it work. It's the problem of the university in general. The university thinks everything is a problem of ignorance, but it is not. And ethics is a question of character, not a question of ignorance. I said to him, I grew up in a blue-collar environment. None of the men on the street where I grew up would be able to tell you what ethics meant, but they certainly taught it to their sons in particular, sometimes quite forcibly. And it created a community within which certain forms of behavior that are now commonplace were not acceptable. There were no attacks on women. We did not lock our doors. There was virtually no divorce. Those are pretty good ethics, but they have vanished over the next 50 or so years. And he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, I happen to know that in the first year, none of the students have read any Dostoevsky. That's a tragedy. So he said, you better do something about it. So that led to me running a course in literature of medicine. And that was fun. But it also alerted me to the fact that there was a bigger problem here, because they still went on with their ethics course. I pointed out to the dean that the man that he had chosen to run the course, a philosopher, I knew a little bit about. I was probably the only member of his faculty who had lunch with a philosopher every week. And the man he had chosen as the coordinator of this course was technically a competent ethicist. He was also honest. He said, I teach ethics, I don't practice them. And that's a serious problem.
Yes.
He left university in a hurry a few years later, when at long last one of the girls in his course complained about his habit of persuading them to sleep with him. That's teaching ethics but not practicing it.
Yeah.
To complete the liberal fiasco, he returned on an evaluation committee some years later to see whether our course was good enough. That's the university. They write protocols and proposals, but they are not concerned with character. But it's character that makes an ethical doctor. Now, I don't know what it's like in Central America and wherever you all are. You're in Chile.
Yeah.
But I know that in our university, when they started teaching ethics, the students didn't trust about 20% of the class. I know on my travels around North America now that the average class now has no respect for at least 50% of the class. It's getting worse. I've been in one country that shall remain nameless, where when I asked this question, one young woman in the front row said, I don't trust anyone in this university.
Mm.
That means you can't have a referral practice.
Yeah.
And medicine requires a referral practice, but you can't refer someone to someone you don't trust. So that's where the problem arises. Now, the next thing that happened in this process was, I was the kind of professor you probably met who walks in, gives his lecture, walks out, and really doesn't care whether you understood it or not, especially since I was required to teach biochemistry and none of you remember any. Yeah, you get through by doing the memorize and dump fiasco. To really learn some biochemistry is hard work. To memorize some stuff for a little while is something you can do, so that's what you do. You might possibly remember the Krebs cycle, but that's of no value to you because you'll never meet a patient who doesn't have a Krebs cycle. No Krebs cycle, you're dead. The biochemistry that matters to patients is very small print. It's what I was interested in. Metabolic diseases usually take weeks to sort out. And you send bits of liver halfway around the world sometimes to find out what's going on. That's the world of research, a different world. But the world of medicine is not actually dependent upon you being competent scientists. If it did, there'd be very few doctors. It's too much to ask. But one of the things that happened to me about this time, I started to take more interest in students because my faith became progressively more alive. And once the students knew that I actually thought the story was true, they pushed me into teaching them how to practice medicine as a Christian as well. The result of that was that their parents wanted to meet me at graduation. I hated graduation. I thought it was a waste of an afternoon, but I had to go. And the first time I went, the so-called Hippocratic Oath was on the agenda. I didn't have a program because I was late getting there. And so I had to listen. And as I listened, I realized there's no way that's the Oath of Hippocrates. I got a copy, and of course it wasn't. It had been modified in various important ways. And I ended up writing the myth of moral nutrition, what Hippocrates knew and we've forgotten. You can find it online on my website if you want it. But the essential thing for the students listening at the moment is, I usually say that from a Christian point of view, it's very convenient that Hippocrates got it right, because it makes our life a lot easier. We don't have to invoke Christianity at level 1. Nobody hates Hippocrates because they don't know enough about him to either hate or love him. But the oath contains 4 key features which, as Christians, you need to think about. One is, what is the role of transcendence? 2 is, what is the nature of medicine? 3, what is the most practical test of whether you've understood that nature? And 4, what does that require from the patients? So you got those 4? Yeah. I'd like a verbal response that you have heard me.
Yeah, I heard you. What about the others?
I think they've left discussed already.
No. The thing is that I put them in silence so that you could be heard better. Can you activate your audio, everyone?
Did you?
There you go.
Hi.
Okay. Do you remember those 4 points? Have you got them? Or do I need to repeat them?
Repeat them.
Yes, repeat
them. Okay. I'll add a little explanation this time. Number 1 is transcendence. That means a belief in God. There has to be something beyond ourselves. And you only have to think for a moment to see why Hippocrates understood this. Rationally, are you going to trust a doctor more or less if he believes he will be judged after death for his behavior? That's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Yeah, it's very clear that
trust a doctor more if he believes he'll be judged after death. That's what Hippocrates wanted, because in those days, doctors killed for profit, as in fact we are already doing in the Western world. We're not acknowledging it, but it's certainly happening.
Yeah.
Transcendence is important for that reason, if that reason alone. But secondly, if there is no transcendence, who is going to hold you to account? Only someone who can catch you misbehaving as a doctor. We need transcendence in our lives. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. It does, in fact, put some limits on how bad we can be in many respects. So that's why transcendence matters. It matters even more in the legal profession than it does in the medical profession. Yeah. Because in the legal profession, if the judges at the top court do not fear God, they will make laws that serve their own community, the elite, and not the ordinary hoi polloi like you and me. And that's what they're doing in the Western world. The second thing is, what is the nature of medicine? Now, I can only see Caballero on my screen and Hector. It's Eric Caballero, right?
Ética.
I don't know whether because his face doesn't show any, he's just got total control of his facial features so that I can't tell whether he's this. Oh, but he signaled that he was. Okay, ask you two, since you're the only 2 I can see at the moment, and I can watch your faces. On this issue of what is the nature of medicine, do patients have to take your advice?
I think that the nature of medicine should be caring for life.
Answer my question very directly. Yeah. When a patient comes into your office, do they have to take your advice?
It depends on them, but
yes, they are free to choose, right?
Yeah.
If they are free to choose, then your primary function is in fact to help them to decide what they ought to do, right?
Yeah.
It's not there is a moral activity going on there, because ought and should are not scientific words. They're moral words. They are philosophy or religion. They're not science. So the doctor is not primarily a scientist, but primarily, whether he knows it or not, a philosopher/theologian, because his first response is to help the patient to do right.
Yeah.
Now we don't agree as to what ethics are, so that's going to be a complex discussion. But it's important for you to remember that is primarily what you do. Now, Hippocrates and his friends went on, and they realized that the key test that everybody around could see to determine your character was that you would not kill. So in the original oath, it said, I will not do abortions, and I will not even suggest suicide. But that was a very unusual position, because killing was part of medicine 500 years before Christ, as it is becoming part of medicine again now. Not a good move. It served us well to separate that from medicine for a long while, and we should still do that. The only reason they want us to be involved in abortion and euthanasia is to give it some credibility. You don't need to go to medical school for 10 years to learn to do an abortion or learn to put a needle in the vein and put some poison in it. You can learn to do that in less than a month, and you'll be very good at it.
Yeah.
The only reason they want us involved is so that they can make it look good by coming under the cloak of medicine and thereby damaging medicine. And we should have fought very hard to say, we shouldn't do this. We should be the one group of people who are told never to do it, because it's not in the patient's interest that we should kill. And the reason being that it undermines trust.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming even more difficult as time goes by to be strong against all society that wants us to act in ways that are maybe and are sometimes different to what our inner moral and ethics are as Christians.
Well, we're going to be excluded if we don't get our act together. We'll come to that in a moment. So, transcendence is necessary. Someone wanted to say something?
Yes.
For you.
Hello.
Hello. So, in what I'm hearing about what you're talking about, you are saying that in order for a person to have a character or a moral, she or he has to believe in God, or yes, believe in God. It's not possible for a person to have a character or morals if we don't believe in something else.
Well, not have the kind of morals that have made medicine possible. Now, I often say to particularly Jewish physicians who are unbelieving that I'm glad that your ethics are better than your moral position can support. I mean, just take Darwin for a moment. Most of the university believes that Darwin got it right. He didn't. But if evolution is true at the most fundamental level, and we're all the product of time plus chance, if that is the case, what kind of morality can you expect from the doctor? It all depends on what's in it for him, because it all comes down to a battle of the genes. Now, let's propose for a moment that you, is it Camilla I'm looking at? Or
it's Sophia.
Sophia. Oh, wisdom herself. Very nice. An excellent example, yes. Well, Sophia, let's imagine that you've got cancer. And let's imagine that last week I invented a cure for that cancer in my laboratory. Okay. Ought I to give it to you? Now, obviously, the answer from you immediately is yes. Yes. But what if you are a very wealthy woman, and when you die, I get your estate, and I'm a Darwinian? Now, what should I do?
Sorry?
If you're a very wealthy woman, and when you die, I inherit your wealth, and I'm a Darwinian, what should I do?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand.
I will translate. Lo que dijo es que si él tiene la cura del cáncer, pero en este caso vos sos, primero puso el caso de que si vos tenés que si vos tenés cáncer, él tiene la cura, y él te da, debería o no debería dártela, primero. Lo primero es, debería de dártela porque te va a salvar, pero si sos darwiniana, si pensás en las teorías de Darwin per se sólidas, entonces, si vos sos una persona con dinero y él va a heredar tu herencia y él tiene la cura, si sos darwiniana, ¿qué tenés que hacer?
Pero,
You're getting the answer.
o sea,
The best book on this, which I'm sure has been translated into Spanish by now, is by David Stowe from Australia, and it's called Darwinian Fairy Tales. Now, he was an atheist. He's dead now. He committed suicide when he found he'd got cancer, which is a rational thing for an atheist to do. But not before he'd written Darwinian Fairy Tales and one or two other books, all of which are excellent. And as he said, Darwin may or may not be true as a explanation of some form of development of one animal from another, but it is no explanation of human behavior, ethics. You cannot derive moral positions, ought and should, from factual statements. A factual statement doesn't tell you what to do. What to do comes from what you believe. And if you believe there is no God, why shouldn't I rip you off? If I can get away with it, that's the only question that matters. And increasingly, you will have colleagues who are ripping you and patients off. You have them in your class. There are people in your class you wouldn't trust a dog of yours to their care, let alone your mom or dad, right?
Yes, I understand what you're saying. Yes,
Yeah.
it can, but I think that
The major problem with Darwin is ethics, and they will not deal with it. There is no Darwinian account of human behavior which includes good and evil. Read Darwinian Fairy Tales if you need to, a book-length discussion of it. But it's always worth asking a Darwinian, why would you not do what advantages your genes regardless of anything else?
Yeah.
Put that into Spanish.
Sí, lo que dijo es que primero que te recomendó el libro de Darwinian Fairy Tales, ¿verdad? Donde puedes ver eso, y una de las cosas primordiales es que en la búsqueda de pensamientos, de hechos fijos en las teorías de Darwin, es bien difícil encontrar una parte moral, y a veces todo se cae en cuanto a cómo comportarse si se enfoca solo en los hechos, solo en los datos, porque los datos al final no te van a poder llevar a formas de comportamiento de lo que debes o no debes hacer.
It's amazing how many words you need in Spanish.
But I don't know. I am always asking me because I have like some doubts of how to be a better person, because like you said, there are too many things happening around the world, crazy things, how the people act and their characters, and I always like questioning myself, so what they are doing or why things happen the way they are happening. Is there like a purpose for all of this? Because it seems like nothing has sense at all. People are being bad. People doesn't want to be good, doesn't want to serve others. There are things like that. It's very hard to understand, but what you are saying is truth. It's true. Maybe man needs to believe in something else in order to have, in order to do good acts or good actions, to help others, to do the right thing. So,
well, C.S. Lewis, I don't know if you read C.S. Lewis. I'm sure he's translated into Spanish. Do you?
Yeah.
Any of you read?
Pregunta si ha leído.
He was probably the best of the English Christian apologists in the 50s, 60s, 70s. Yeah, well, he died in the 60s. But he made this point that you're bringing up is one that led to his conversion. Because he, like you, looked at the world and said, it's such a horrible place. I can't believe in a God who would allow this to happen. Which is, I just don't want such a God. And then he realized, because he was a very intelligent man, but where did I get the idea that the world should be any different? I got that idea from this God I don't want to believe in. There's no explanation of suffering and evil that is totally satisfactory if there is nothing beyond this world. Now, I had to sort this out very early in my life because I've spent most of my medical career dealing with children who will have a life that many people will judge to be not worth living. Severely malnourished children in the developing world, children with cystic fibrosis, and children with cerebral palsy. They've been the main groups that I've dealt with. All of them carry a huge burden of suffering. If there is an answer, it's not in this world.
Yeah.
Amazingly, they often know that. And that's one of the things you're going to find out in medicine. Never miss an opportunity to be at somebody's death, particularly if they're Christian. You will see things that will amaze you. One of the turning points in my life was a young man who had assisted me with some research on cystic fibrosis. I don't know how much CF you see in the Spanish world. It's a Caucasian disease. Do you have much in South America?
Yeah, there is in South America, and I've seen some patients in Honduras as well.
Okay, well, you've seen them too.
No,
good.
But I know what it is.
You know what it is. Well, in my career, I did the malnutrition work first. After doing internal medicine, I did a PhD and then did the research on malnutrition. So when I came to be a professor of pediatrics and biochemistry in Canada, I needed a model, and I found it in cystic fibrosis. 30 years ago, most young people dying of cystic fibrosis were technically malnourished when they died. So I needed to jump through some hoops to do some research because I wanted to find, A, could I reverse it? And B, was it worth reversing? Now, the first volunteer was a 15-year-old boy with the body mass of an 11-year-old. He was very thin. And he was a farmer's son, couldn't even lift a small bale. As soon as he heard I was wanting to see if I could make cystic fibrosis patients grow more, he lined up for the experiment. And I said, I haven't even told you what I want to do. He said, I'll do whatever it is. And I said, well, I need to put a tube through your nose into your stomach for a month to do the initial experiments. And given your cough, that tube could go in 200 times in a month because you'll cough it up. Can you handle that? He said, yes. And he never complained. About halfway through the month, one Sunday, I was called by the nurses and they said, we've got so many admissions today. If you want your protocol followed, you'll have to come in and put the tube into Stephen because he's just coughed it up again, middle of the day, and we won't have time to put it in till 8 o'clock tonight. So I went in and put the tube in. And then I went home. But his mother the next week, who was a saint, said to me, she met me in the corridor and she said, you had an opportunity on Sunday to talk to Stephen about faith and you didn't use it. You could talk about faith very effectively. She had no evidence for that statement. Turns out she was right, but she had no evidence. And I took no notice. I didn't talk about faith and hadn't done for more than 20 years in hospital. But some 4 years later, I got a call to go and see Stephen in the middle of the day. And when I got to his room, he was clearly dying. His mum was sitting by the bed. He'd said nothing for a few hours, which is what happens when you're dying of respiratory failure with a CO2 level going up. The best way. Oxygen going down is much worse. CO2 going up, a mild headache is the most you have to deal with. You don't want to be alone, but you don't want to talk. But when I came in, he said, good, I want to talk to you. Sit down. We were much past the usual doctor-patient relationship. We'd become friends. And he said, think of yourself in this position. He said, it says in the Bible, if you ask anything in my name, I'll give it to you. I'm 19 and I'm dying and I don't want to. What do you say? What are you going to say? Any of you?
I
it's very difficult to.
Yes.
It's very difficult. Yeah, that's an answer that I'm going to get, I suspect. Yeah, I thought it was very difficult too, and so I wanted to escape as quickly as possible, but he was a friend, so I couldn't. We did share the same ironic sense of humor. We both like Monty Python, so we knew about ironic humor. We shared that. So he was a Catholic, I was a Protestant. So I went through the creeds. We had those in common. Of course, that didn't help because he believed them. He believed in God. He believed Jesus was the Son of God. He believed that if you confess your sins, you're forgiven, and when you die, you go to heaven. But he wasn't ready to die. It wasn't actually helping. I was praying as well, of course. Lord, you know I need help. What do I say? And he popped into my head a wonderful American writer called Annie Dillard. The book was called Pilgrim at Tinker's Creek. It's certainly been translated into Spanish, and you'd probably enjoy it. She lived a disordered life and then became Christian, so she knew about both sides. It turned out it was actually a footnote that came into my head. And it was this: oh yes, God will provide for all your needs, but do read the small print. He decides what your needs are. Hector, you should probably translate that into Spanish to make sure they've got
it. Can you repeat it once more so that I can get it right?
I'll do bit by bit. She wrote, oh yes, God will provide for all your needs.
Oh sí, Dios va a proveer para todas tus necesidades.
But do read the small print.
Pero lean la letra pequeña.
You know, the stuff at the bottom of the insurance policy.
Sí,
decides what your needs are, not you.
Él decide cuáles son tus necesidades, no tú.
Okay.
And that is true. I'd already pointed out to Stephen that by this time his research had led to a protocol that's used all over the world now and has given at least 5 years of extra life to children with CF and has made their dying 6 weeks rather than 2 years of depressed misery. He made a wonderful contribution to humanity as a whole, much more than most of us would do. And I pointed out to him that there were children on that ward running who wouldn't have been able to walk but for his courage. And little boys in Canada who could still skate a little bit, which is very important to them. So I said to him something that social workers would not like at all. I said, both you and I know that unless there is a miracle, you're going to die in the next few hours. Given what you say you believe, and knowing that God has your greater good in mind, then there must be some sense in which it will be better for you. Can you believe that? And he was very quiet for a moment, and then he looked up and he smiled and said, yes, I can. Thank you, that helps. And he died very peacefully a few hours later. But his wonderful mother, who was going to lose 3 children to CF, 3 of her children, the only children she had, were all going to die before she did. But she's a saint. She said later, years later, she said, if God had told me what he wanted me to do, I would have said it would be impossible, but it wasn't. I learned a lot. But she wrote and said, it was ironic you were not allowed to give Stephen food for his body. But thank God you were there when he needed food for his soul. He'd been asking that question of his doctor, his priest, his friends, his family, and everybody pushed it away until I came along. Now, it really wouldn't make any difference to Stephen because in a few hours he'd be with God and all those problems would evaporate. It was for his mother and for me.
Yeah.
His mother needed that Stephen die well, which he did, because she was going to have to deal with it 3 times. For me, it was a guilt trip, and it forced me out of my ivory tower into what I do now. And I'm very grateful for that. Stephen changed the direction of my life to a better direction, not a worse one.
Yeah.
Now, the 4th thing that Hippocrates understood is that if we are to practice medicine in this way, then patients owe us the right of conscience. And you can show that to them very easily. Let me do it to you. I can only see Hector and Sophia at the moment, so the others escape because I can't see their faces, and it's important to see them if I want to see whether I've made my point.
Yeah, let me see if I... it's
some more faces for me to see, yeah.
Yeah, there. And let me see if I can...
There's Eric. I haven't seen the young lady who's no doubt driving rapidly towards the beach or something like that. Yeah.
Camila.
Yeah, Camilla, yeah. Anyway, I've got 3 faces now. Enough for my test, so to speak. Not a very large number of experiments, but a start. You must learn to ask this question. You are going to be asked to do things in medicine over the next 50 years which you believe to be wrong if you're an Orthodox Christian. Don't say no as the first response to your mentors. Say, may I ask you a question? And the question you need to learn to ask is, do you wish you and your family to be cared for by a doctor with or without moral integrity? Hector, you probably ought to translate that too to make sure they've got it.
Yeah.
Or if there's somebody who's better at the English-Spanish translation, they can do it.
Okay. A ver, ¿escucharon? No sé si quieren...
Yes. Yo entendí, le puedo responder.
Eric.
Yeah, doctor, I understood.
You understood?
Okay.
Can you put it into...
Yeah, I would rather add, excuse me?
Lo que dijo el doctor para todos es, si todos ustedes, o sea, durante su carrera, van a haber momentos en donde van a haber personas que les van a pedir que hagan cosas que van en contra de lo que ustedes creen, de lo que ustedes piensan. Entonces, en ese momento deberían de poder hacerles, no respondan peleando, no respondan de forma diferente, sino haciendo una pregunta. ¿Ustedes preferirían o no preferirían que se les atendiera a ustedes o a su familia con integridad moral?
Okay, you got it? Everybody wants a doctor with moral integrity. It follows that you must provide space for different views of what that might look like. In other words, we cannot have a monolithic medicine in a world that doesn't have a moral consensus. We need competing models. Yeah. We're not producing them yet. We used to have them. Of course, the hospitals and the medical systems were all originally Christian. They've been secularized by the liberal elite over the last 200 years. But we need, basically, yes, a secular system for those who have no known beliefs. And that will include abortion, euthanasia, and the killing of the handicapped, and various other things that are perfectly rational if you believe that life has no ultimate meaning, but not under any other circumstances. And hospitals where every life is looked upon as being the image of God and therefore worthy of the utmost respect. Yes, you have to learn when someone has entered upon their dying, and then only comfort is proper medicine. But the role of the disabled in our society is being deliberately undersold at the moment. The handicapped children, the mentally handicapped children that I cared for, have a huge role to play in our world. I don't know where you are in your medical careers, but let me just tell you one thing that the Middle Ages understood about these children. They said people who are supposedly called mentally defective almost invariably do not take a grudge, do not take anger into tomorrow. Just think how much better your medical school would be if nobody came to school tomorrow with yesterday's grudges and anger. That's what mentally disabled people do all the while. So, said the Middle Ages, they are closer to Christ than the rest of us. And they are.
Yeah. I think what it's some of the things that are happening now is that how I see it is that maybe I can see the for example, I can see the sky and the mountains, and I can write about them, and I can put facts about their color, facts about how trees grow and everything, but everything changes when actually you go and see mountains and see trees and see the skies for yourself, and you see that there are more things to lives than or that things have inherently some things that are greater than the ways we can describe them by facts and only seen through the microscope of science. And
yes. Science can only provide us with physical facts. It cannot provide us with meaning. And we all need meaning, especially at the end of our life. We must be getting close to the end of the time that's allotted, but before I finish, I want to read to you my favorite account of what it means to be a doctor. It was written in the 17th century by a man called Thomas Sydenham, who was an amazing man. He does occur in your textbooks because he described a disease called Sydenham's chorea. He was also the first physician in the Western world to use opiates for pain control in a rational fashion. So he was a very remarkable man. But this is what he wrote. It becomes every man who purposes to give himself to the care of others seriously to consider the four following things. You'll recognize Hippocrates in what follows. First, that he must one day give an account to the supreme judge of all the lives entrusted to his care. Secondly, that all his skill and knowledge and energy, as they have been given by God, so they should be exercised for his glory and the good of mankind, and not for mere gain or ambition. Thirdly, and not more beautifully than truly, let him reflect that he has undertaken the care of no mean creature. For in order that he may estimate the value, the greatness of the human race, the only begotten Son of God became himself a man, and thus ennobled it with his divine dignity, and far more than this, died to redeem it. And fourthly, that the doctor, being himself a mortal man, he should be diligent and tender in relieving his suffering patients, inasmuch as he himself must one day be a like sufferer. Now, I imagine that if you were dying and that man opened the door of your room, you would feel privileged to say, "Hello, doctor."
You're absolutely right.
Now, you should get that translated into Spanish. Have it in your wallet or your purse. Make some copies, because if you hang it in your office, patients will want a copy because it's beautiful and it's reassuring.
Yes, yes. I didn't know that about Sydenham.
Yeah, he was in the civil war between the Roundheads, the Puritans, and the Royalists in the 17th century. And at one point, a cavalier, a royalist, pointed a pistol at him, point blank, pulled the trigger, and the cavalier died because the pistol exploded, and Sydenham was left alive. He had the sense that God might have something for him to do after that. Do you have any questions?
Any questions?
Probably a little hard for you because you don't have talks like this every day, do you?
Yeah, not every day.
Yeah. Do you have medical student conferences in Central and South America? Christian medical students? Or is this the only way you?
We have some conferences in like medical conference in Central America, and we have a medical conference every year. once a year.
Yeah. I'd been to, some years ago, to Uruguay for the ICMDA meeting. I came to Chile many years ago, but that was for scientific reasons and not for Christian ones. But I haven't been back to South and Central America to talk about the Christian aspects of faith. But should you have a conference, there is a fund that I have access to, so you wouldn't have to pay the travel costs.
Oh,
So
perfect.
think about it.
Actually, I would.
I'd much prefer to be sitting with you in a coffee shop than doing it on screen.
Yeah. Actually, would you be? Let me talk with the director. I think he will be thrilled to have you in Honduras, and I'll see if we can organize for what month of the year would be suitable for
you need to plan for a year ahead.
A year
because
ahead.
I do something like 200 talks a year.
Okay.
So I'm booked up almost a year ahead.
Oh, perfect.
So
October next year would be fine.
You've got an email address, right?
Yeah.
You've got my email address.
Yeah. Well, I get. Yeah.
Sally makes the decisions as to where I go because she knows what. So I come back from one talk and ask her where I go next. That's the way it works.
Perfect. So I will talk with the directors of the university, and we will be honored to have you in Honduras next year.
Do grand rounds in the medical school and things like that as well. And I'm very happy to preach in a church if there is one that would like it.
Perfect.
But I would like to meet face to face. It would be good.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Dr. Patrick, and I can assure you they will be thrilled and honored to have you next year.
Well, I'll leave you to talk in your native tongue, and I'll stop interfering with your brains, which is what you do when you have to translate all the while. Although many of you may be more fluent than you are prepared to admit, but I do not speak Spanish. So the only essential thing if I come will be a really good translator.
Yeah, we have
God
some
can
translator.
Yeah. I've been to Cuba more than any other Spanish-speaking country. I've been there about 6 times, and they allow me to do Christian things as well as medical ones, amazingly.
Great.
Anyway,
great.
It's good to talk to you, and I'll leave you then.
Okay.
Unless you have something important you want to say.
Just to tell you how grateful we are that you accepted to talk to us today, and thank you very much.
Well, thank you for asking me. It was a pleasure.